700 interviews now. I have been looking forward to this one probably more than most of my other ones that I've done. And you're the only chef that I've actually ever had on this show. So
Wow.
I want to give people a little bit of context just on who you are, what you've done, because a lot of people might not be familiar with this whole world of food and world's best and 3 Michelin stars. So I read that you got involved with cooking completely on accident. So why don't we start there and how you got involved doing what you're doing, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff you have going on now.
Absolutely. So, yeah, cooking to me was a complete accident. I was 15 years old, and I will be 45 very soon. So it's already 30 years in this industry. And I was finishing ninth grade in Copenhagen, and my teacher came to me and said, thank you, but we don't need to see you at school again after you finish the ninth grade. And back then, you could actually be deemed ineligible to continue further education, meaning that you were forced into some sort of trade of sorts. And I got that little tick on the same day as she told me, we don't want you back for 10th grade. I also got this little piece of paper where she had sort of ticked the box where it says, non-eligible for further advancement in educations, which meant college and sort of the Danish version of high school was out. And for that reason, I followed, at the time, my best friend. His name was Michael, and he always wanted to be a cook. I had never dreamed of cooking in my life. And then starting in cooking school, almost immediately, I got sucked in a big way, and that happened because of a competition. In the first week of school, they had a competition for all of us youngsters, and that really did something to me, like in a big way.
Interesting. Well, today, so for people who might not be familiar, you've won the world's #1 restaurant 5 times. In fact, I think they actually changed the rules because of you and your restaurant, that if you win, you can't win anymore because you were winning so many times. You're on the world's 50 best of the best list, 3-star Michelin restaurant. So why don't we give people a little bit of context around what that means? Because, when most people go out to eat, you just go to a restaurant that's near you, maybe you go to a special restaurant every now and then. But not everybody's familiar with what goes on inside of a 3-star Michelin restaurant or being the world's best restaurant. So how is that different? Take us in the inside of that restaurant. What does that look like?
So, I mean, first of all, we will be 20 years old very soon. And this also means that in the past 2 decades, like, the world has changed quite dramatically.
Yeah.
Just from social media arriving to the planet and the iPhone and smartphones in general, our trade has also changed dramatically. So we are a very different restaurant now than what we were 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. But if you look at how things are today at the restaurant, we are a team of approximately 70 people working daily, and we serve approximately 75 guests daily. And we work hard from morning to night. We have 4 different kitchens, one of them being a prep kitchen, another being a service kitchen. Service kitchen is where all the last minute preparations happen. Besides that, we have a fermentation lab where we dabble in the world of yeast, mold, and bacteria to produce, like, the pillars of flavor that we use. Besides that, we have a test kitchen as well. And all of these things, they're in action daily to produce a menu to the delight of our guest. Besides that, there's a team of sommeliers and waiters and tea specialists that all every day trying to select and brew the best possible. And besides that, we have, a list of purveyors. We have kitchen managers only for supply chains. We have foragers, 2 full-time hired out every day, sourcing the freshest berry. And it just goes on and on. We have a full-time carpenter to take care of the chairs and the tables.
Wow.
We do everything possible that we can think of. If we think it's a good idea for the benefit of our guest, we will do it, even though we don't have to. That's the difference, I think, is that we are not happy with, let's call it, what the lowest common denominator thinks is okay. Even at a 3 Michelin star, we want to even go beyond what we think is okay, what we thought was okay last year. We have to go beyond that every year.
So what does 3 Michelin stars mean? What does the world's best restaurant mean, the world's best chef? How do they evaluate you and your restaurant on that? Is it just tasty food, or what goes into being a 3 Michelin star restaurant?
If you hear a huffing and puffing, it's my dog.
Oh,
That's
okay.
just down here.
I have 2 dogs, so I totally get it.
Hanzo, be a good girl, okay? She's right here. First of all, being the best restaurant in the world. Hello. Yeah, I love you too, girl, but I'm busy. Okay.
Very cute dog.
Being the best restaurant in the world, I don't think there's anyone at the restaurant, and including myself, that actually genuinely believes that we are the best of all the restaurants in all the lands.
Tells you.
Yeah, but on the 50 best list, there's like a panel of, I believe it's 1,200 people.
Wow.
Most of them food professionals. Either they're cooks, chefs, or food professionals, or journalists. And each year they cast a vote. They have 5 votes. And the one who, I guess, is like the Oscars of sorts. The one who gets the most votes wins. And we've been number 1 5 times. We've been number 2, number 3, number 5, number 10. We've been on this list for a long time, but we obviously don't consider ourselves the best restaurant in the world. And now the 3 Michelin star thing, which is probably the highest accolade you can get as a restaurant, because it's the golden standard of restaurant judgment, and it originates from France. And only in the past 20 years they started kind of leaving the French world and stepping into the grand planet. Mm-hmm. And getting 3 stars there is like, as a young cook 30 years ago, you get told all the time 3 stars is the ultimate goal. Nothing can ever, it's like the impossible dream to get that, basically.
Yeah. And so they evaluate that on food, just presentation, taste.
They come anonymously, probably several times a year. Oh. And they've been eating at Noma probably minimum twice a year for the past 20 years. Wow. Anonymously. And sometimes they say they've been 3-4 times.
Oh, interesting. So I want to talk about your career a little bit, because you have a very, very fascinating story. So one of the things that I read is that you used to be a very different type of chef earlier on in your career. As a sous chef, you used to be angry, you used to scream, you used to shout. Can you talk a little bit about your earlier days as a sous chef? What were you really like? And then what caused your transformation?
Yeah. Well, as a young cook, traveling the world, working at the best restaurants, I would always look at all the angry head chefs, and they were all very angry, and the sous chefs were even angrier. And it was just the general standard of the trade, that it's a very army system. Actually, the system in most kitchens comes from the French army that an old chef called Escoffier, he brought into the world of cooking after finished the army, and he became one of the greatest chefs ever in the last 200 years. He made, Escoffier is his name. But I used to tell myself, what are they doing? Can't they see it doesn't work? It was this management by fear. And I guess it works, but it doesn't work in the long run. But in the short one, or it might be, beneficial. But I always used to tell myself this: I will never be like that. And then, lo and behold, I find myself opening my own restaurant. I'm 25 years old. I've only worked in kitchens. I have no clue about how to manage anything. And on the very first day, in the very first week, with the very first guest that steps through your door, and you realize, oh, this is on me now. I have everything on the line. What if we mess up? And then that's when this thing starts happening to you, where you don't know how to handle yourself. You don't know how to manage yourself. You don't have any tools, and you have no confidence either, because you're just starting out. How are people going to accept it? And then slowly but surely you start becoming the thing you said you'd never become, which is letting small mistakes that are bound to happen become disasters to you for no apparent reason.
So what would be like a small mistake that would happen that would just set you off?
Well, I can't, there's too many to mention, but there would be so many things, and I would be, I'd just be angry, and I'd come home to my wife and I say, I don't know what's going on. I don't even know where all this anger comes from.
So I didn't realize I had inflated properly, and you would see it go out and you would just go crazy.
Yeah. And I would be, what are you doing? And shout, do it again, and probably put the kitchen even more into the weeds by just continuously kind of turning back plates, as opposed to trying to figure out a system so that these mistakes that are bound to happen less frequently because of your excellent leadership and system building behaviors.
So it's interesting.
I didn't have that. And
Yeah.
the big change for me was being so unhappy with myself, actually. Coming home, and I tried for so long to tell myself, tomorrow you're not going to do it anymore. You're not going to be upset. You have no reason to be upset by this. People are not in your mind. They can't possibly see things the way you're seeing it. You got to allow some space for this sort of wiggle room. And tomorrow you're just going to come in and you're just going to talk calmly and never get upset. And then you get upset. And then you realize, okay, this needs a big change, because I'm not making people happy, and I'm for sure myself very, very unhappy. And I was genuinely unhappy. And I just made the decision, either you leave entirely or you try to change things.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
And when you say screaming, a lot of people, the stereotypical screaming chef, everybody thinks of Gordon Ramsay, right? Because all of his shows, he's always screaming, "You're an idiot. That's terrible." Was it kind of like that?
I could definitely be like that.
Okay. Okay, because it's interesting, because I think a lot of leaders in corporations, they struggle with this too. And they do things a certain way, command and control, lead by fear. And sometimes they too say, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to show up, I'm going to be a different leader. Or I read a book, I'm going to be different tomorrow. And the same thing, they show up the next day just like you did, and nothing changes. So what did you do to change? And was there like a pivotal moment where you came home one day and you're just like, I can't do this anymore? Or was it just kind of a gradual building up to that?
I would say it was a gradual building up. But there was one moment just looking in the mirror saying, no, not anymore.
Yeah.
And then really trying to find the tools to actually make a change. Hundreds of hours of therapy, coaching, book reading, experimenting, with your team, what works. Sometimes you implement a small little change and you think that's nothing, probably, and it might be huge. And slowly with time, it really started to working. And what was the main thing that really made a huge difference was when I started delegating. And that was the hardest bit for me, because I had to figure out, what is it that I don't like about my work that makes me go there. And so I spent probably a couple of years just trying to figure out, what is it that triggers me, and why is it that I don't have the capacities to be in that specific role. And once I started looking for that, then the next step, which was very, very hard, is figuring out who then can take that specific role, and start dividing out the team in sections with section leaders. So for instance, I know now today that the head of the service kitchen, the service kitchen is like where the action is. It's in the middle of the night, all the orders are in, guests are there, they have expectations, some have waited for a decade to eat. Every day is like Super Bowl. You can't mess up. You can't have a mid-season friendly match. Every day is the biggest of the big. So what sort of personality can guide the team through the trials and tribulations and the mistakes, and somebody bumps into another person and drops a fish on the floor and you have to redo the whole thing, and that makes all the other orders sort of wait and hold. And how do you manage that? And that whole part of it, actually figuring out who's good at what and trying to study my team and trying to put people in the right positions, was also very difficult. But once I started learning that, oh man, it just changed everything, and for me personally as well, but also for the spirit and the culture of our team.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize, restaurants like that, people do. I mean, I've never eaten at Noma. I hope one day I will. But people, like you said, they wait months, years to get into your restaurant. So it's very, very high pressure. And like you said, you only serve 75 people a day. And literally everybody who walks into your restaurant has these enormously high expectations of you and your team. Like everything's got to be perfect. Everything needs to be amazing. How do you deal with that kind of pressure? Because, inside of the business world, for example, you do have, leaders have high expectations of their team, but it's not as high as in your restaurant, where every day you need to be a high performer. You can't have a bad day or an off day. Like every single day you have to be on. How do you do that?
Ooh, it's very, very, very hard. And, the burnout rate in the restaurant industry is high because of this pressure every night. And it is not just in fine dining. I mean, go to a busy brunch restaurant and look at the cook, how he's dabbling with 1,000 orders over 2 hours. I mean, sometimes you forget your own name, believe it or not, because there's just so much pressure on your mind at that point, these points. But very early on, I taught myself, and it doesn't always work, but it works for the most time, that the best thing you can do to yourself is come to work with the mindset of being as concentrated as possible. And if you are able to have the discipline and be there for that, like that, at the end of the day, if there really is something wrong or somebody doesn't like it, which of course happens again and again, you have that as your protection. You know that you were there and gave it what you did. But besides that, it's hard. I mean, you try to speak to people. I think that's another very important thing, particularly leaders. They need more brain space to think and have time to think, so that they're not just sort of all the time absorbed in problem solving or making decisions. They also need time to properly think. So I do that. I actually take my time. I hike quite a bit, sometimes for week-long hikes.
Wow.
Where my phone is only sporadically open. And that's where I can deep think and get through big strategies, big issues. I also am a firm believer in having a mentor for anyone. Someone you look up to that you can always call. And I've also...
So you have one. You have a mentor right now.
Yeah, I do. It's a very successful person. And I call him up once in a while. And his advice to me was, learn, René, you have to learn and be happy with being second best. That's your longevity plan.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so it's a very good advice, actually. But sometimes when you also talk to these people that are smarter than you also, once in a while, and I've done that a few times in my life, you have to free fall into their advice against your better judgment. And this is something that personally people call me all the time, and I give them advice, but people rarely follow them. They already made their mind. This is what most people do, I think. But once in a while, I've actually followed the advice against my better judgment from someone smarter than me or more experienced that know exactly what I'm going through. And it's been very, very helpful. Very helpful.
You mentioned earlier that you used to do some experiments with your team. So what are some of the changes that you made? So you showed up to work and you said, I'm not going to be this kind of leader anymore, this old school command and control. I'm going to be different. What were some of the changes that you put into place to change the culture and the environment and the team dynamics?
First of all, it was a long change. These things that are old systems, they don't change overnight like that, but let's say a very small change that actually was incredible was to put music into a kitchen. And
really
talking about it today seemed like almost nothing, but having grown up in a very traditional style fine dining, I've worked in kitchens where you weren't allowed to speak to each other, like really, really strict.
Like you couldn't talk?
You couldn't speak to each other. You would just work, be concentrated.
Wow. So if you talk to somebody, would the chef come in and be like, "Hey, stop it"?
Yeah, there'd be no talk, stop talking.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. You probably have some pretty good stories of like back in the day.
Back in the day, I mean, I think for the most part, these things are gone. I hope so. But it wasn't at all unusual. It was actually very, very common. We also made a very, very conscious decision to have the best possible staff food that we can have, which also sounds crazy because you'd think at most restaurants, aren't you eating fantastically? No. The answer to that is no. In most restaurants, people are barely eating. They're probably eating out of a plastic container, some scraps that are quickly put together. And most likely they don't even sit and have dinner. That's a lot of places. So we made a canteen for our team. We eat twice a day. There's always 2 people only for staff meal. We eat well. We did some creative exercises. We did something we call Saturday night projects, where each team member once a month has to present a project, and they can do whatever they want. And then the team will taste it and talk about the project. And that was actually incredible because not only did it foster more creative thinking in the team, but it also gave them kind of, let's say, if there was someone that was a little bit robotic in their work, and meaning that if they were handed a recipe, they just followed the recipe blindly, as opposed to also tasting and understanding, today the strawberry is a little bit different than yesterday, so I need to adjust the recipe. That really, the Saturday night projects changed people for the better. And it also allowed me actually to, in this new search for people, managers in different roles, it allowed me to see, okay, there's a really specific creative mind in this person. For instance, many years ago, we're talking about 8 years ago, there was a woman, her name is Meta, and she did a dessert with cabbages. And it sounds completely wrong, even back then, even to a group of cooks. And it's, late at night, we just finished service, and she's presenting her cabbage dessert to the entire team. And we're like, what's going on? But for some reason, she had coaxed out a dessert. And it was cabbage. And today she heads our test kitchen.
Oh,
so
wow.
And she was a young woman. She's still young, but she heads our test kitchen. She just had her first child. And that to me was like, okay, your mind is put together in a different way, because what I'm looking for in that role is people who can see opportunities where other people can't. Most people see a head of cabbage and they just think some like peasant food, while they see 100 different things. And she's one of those people.
Yeah, and I was reading about that, and I read that. So interestingly enough, most of those Saturday ideas don't actually get into your menu, right? It's not like every Saturday somebody presents something and you're like, great, that's going to go in the menu. So why do it if it doesn't actually make it into the menu and doesn't get implemented across the restaurant? Some people might say, well, what's the point? Isn't that just a fruitless exercise if you don't make it a part of what you serve?
Yeah, I can see why people say that, and I've heard that before, but sometimes the profit of a exercise might be the experience itself. It might be a team building exercise. It might be adding to this undefinable mass of energy that makes for a culture. The little pat on the shoulder for somebody doing well, the confidence that it might build in someone for then 2 years down the line to actually put something on the menu. it's like it yields so many other things that it's besides the point to have a dish on the menu. That's like, it doesn't even matter, we'll take care of that, us from the test kitchen. It's more, the other things are actually more important when you're trying to build a team and you're trying to build confidence and trust.
I like that. I'm curious, have you ever had a bad day at Noma? Because I'm assuming you've been doing this for so long. You must have had some bad days. Can you share a story of like when everything went wrong at Noma and things just, everything fell apart? What happened and how did you and your team deal with it?
So there's so many days. Where to begin? I mean, we had one day where the fire alarm went off twice, and it's a fire alarm where you simply can't be in the building. It's painful. So everybody has to stand outside. It's in the middle of the winter. It's raining. All the food has to be thrown out. You start again. It's a real mess, We've also tried when we did one of our pop-ups in Mexico. One day it just started raining out of the blue, and we were an outdoor restaurant. That was a disaster as well. It's been many years since we had actual real sort of service style disasters where we run out of food or stuff like that.
Does anybody ever say, I want to speak to the chef, and you come out there and they're like, this is terrible, I hate this food? Has that ever happened?
Actually, that has never happened. I've never experienced that. I mean, I've heard afterwards where somebody had told the waiter, I didn't enjoy this, it wasn't for me. But I mean, it may have happened early on, but I just can't remember anymore, because now I think people know us and they come to the restaurant and they know that we are there, an entire team trying to make them happy. It can't be bad. It just can't be. It's more about, it's not something for you. You might enjoy other things. So that's the most of the criticism we get, is that is not for me. I might enjoy more French style cooking, or I want more meat on the menu, for instance. We hear that quite often.
Well, I went to a couple. So I went to Disfrutar, which I think is now number 3. I went to Borago, which is in Chile. I went to Atelier Cren, which is in San Francisco. Attica in Melbourne, which I think is on the list too. Mm-hmm. And you're right. I mean, sometimes I go, like, for example, Atelier Cren, I did not like as much because it was all there was no meat on the menu. There was a lot of seafood style, some no meat or just no protein of any kind. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't my style as much as like Disfrutar. When I went to Disfrutar and I thought, oh my God, this is like one of the best meals I've had, or Borago, which I thought was so amazing. And when I was in Attica in Melbourne, even that, like, it was weird, right? Because they served ants, green ants. There were emu liver, alligator, like stuff that you're just not used to eating.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I really find fascinating about the food world is that a lot of top chefs like yourself, you're constantly looking at something and saying, well, that could be an ingredient. And I feel like in the business world, we really struggle with that, right? We don't look at something and say, hey, there's an opportunity there. We look at something and say, how can I apply the same thing that I've always been doing, and maybe just like put a garnish on it. Can you talk about your thinking process? Because you have a test kitchen, for example, and you're constantly trying to innovate new ideas. How does that mind work for innovation, for creativity? How do you look at something that most people might see as an ant or, cabbage, and transform it into something else?
Well, first of all, flavor and deliciousness, of course, is paramount. But so is surprise, like surprising our guests and surprising people that eat out a lot, surprising your colleagues, pushing the envelope, having the best idea. That's more important. Not you don't want to. It's almost encoded in cooks. You don't want to repeat yourself. You have to challenge yourself to go beyond what you did last year.
Yeah,
that is just something that's built in you, I think, from the get-go. And it certainly is built into Noma. We're always looking. And we're always trying to train ourselves to see the opportunities other people can't. And for me, the way we deal with it in the test kitchen is that I have a strong belief that creativity comes from your past experiences, reading, meeting people, everything, and your ability to store those special moments, like when something is valuable to your work, that you can see it and take note of it and store it somewhere in that special room. And then further down the line, you might be in the test kitchen and you're working with beets and it's winter, and just like that, you can fuse something from your past with that special moment, and that's when creativity happens, to me. And so, for that reason, we try to have time to study. We travel just for the sake of learning something new, which I think is also, I think, is unusual. But our trade does it a lot because the money is so low anyway. Our average profit in the 20 years we've been open has been 3. So you're not kind of in it for the money, you're in it for the experience, to be with the team, to innovate, to make people happy.
You said average profit 3%. 3%. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Not counting COVID years, because that's been, of course, not well, but pre-COVID, the average has been 3. So, it's just survival rate. If you need to paint the restaurant, that will take 1.5% of that away, and so on and so forth. So I think in that sense, we're also a little more free in the restaurant trade, because we come from a trade that's traditionally not run for profit. It's run for something else. It's run for like challenging yourself to be the best.
Yeah, that's interesting, because one of the things that I read about you is you're a big believer in purpose, right? I mean, it's not, you even said earlier, you're not the number one chef or the number one restaurant for the sake of being number one. You do it for something deeper, for that sense of purpose. The purpose drives you. And as a result of that purpose driving you so much, you have achieved all these accolades. Whereas I think a lot of leaders, sometimes they forget the purpose and they chase quarterly numbers. We have to grow by 5% next year. And the whole purpose of like why the company exists, why the leader is there, is completely gone. What do you do for yourself and for your team to reconnect the work that you guys are doing with the purpose? And what is the purpose of the restaurant?
I mean, in a very simplistic way, the purpose is to create surprise and delight for our guests, to show them a place in the world, and to have them experience something that's completely unique to this place, which is Noma. So developing our style, our taste, our way of presenting things, everything is like is with that in mind. But besides that, we found great purpose in being part of a change in a region. It's been incredible to see the transformation in the past 20 years of not just Copenhagen, but the entire region as a food destination. Today, you can see ramps in supermarkets. You can find the obscure berries in yogurts. It's been a genuine change, and to be able to be part of that, and at certain points spearhead that, has been incredible. And to tell the truth, some of the purposes in the 2 decades we've been open, you always have this in mind, that you're there to show people Noma. People have to understand they're at Noma. But sometimes the purpose also shifts a little bit. So, for instance, right now, even though that we're still a part of being this transformational factor for a region, to show what flavors exist in nature and what can we coax out of fermentations. How can we look at the past to innovate in a fresh way? How can we be ever curious and never lose that? So right now we're in the transitional phase where our focus is very much on our team, trying to figure out how are we going to build the organization that can be the best place of any restaurant organization in the world, meaning workplace, conditions, paychecks, and so forth. That's one of the main purposes that we are pushing for, besides just making guests happy.
I love that. One of the other things that I found most fascinating about you and the restaurants, you were pinnacle of success, top of the game, and then you decided to close the restaurant. And I forgot what year was this. Was this like 2000?
Oh man,
8 or 11 or something? But anyway, you were at the top. You're getting all these awards, number one chef, number one restaurant, and then you're like, we're closing. And I think you moved everybody. Was it to Mexico for a little while?
To Japan first.
Oh, Japan first. Why did you do that? Because most leaders would say, okay, René, that is nuts. You're getting all these awards. You're making so much money. Everyone is recognizing you. Why in the world would you decide to close the restaurant after you're like number one?
Actually, we did it after we had been number one 3 times, but I had already made the decision to close the restaurant because, the success is this incredible thing, but it's also very, very limiting. And you find yourself being pushed into a corner, and it might be a corner with a wonderful couch in it. So you sit really well and it's nice, and it's hard to get out of that couch. I just thought to myself, I'm not even 40 at that time, and I don't want to be in this couch right now. How can we break out of that? Obviously, always knowing that now we are being determined by our success. We will be kind of pigeonholed a little bit, but how can we break free from that and rethink again what we're doing? And so making that decision, we actually planned it for almost 3 years before we made the move. And as we were planning this move, I had a moment of fear, and the fear was, what if we do all this and we close the restaurant, we move to a new place and try to divide the year into new seasons, and we just stick to the same recipes and the same dishes? What if we can see fresh opportunity? And for that reason, we start doing these pop-ups that we did, where we took the entire team from dishwasher to CEO with their children, first to Japan, and we spent 3 months in Japan. Then we went to Australia and spent 6 months in Australia altogether. And then we went to Mexico, where we spent 4 months in Mexico. And the rule was that we'd go to each place and we'd set up a temporary restaurant with the entire team, around 100 people each time, with spouses and children.
Wow.
And we'd take care of everything: schools, apartments, transportation, medical, flights. We took care of everything, and it's the worst financial decision. It's the worst financial decision you can make.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's a ton of, and 3%. That's probably not.
Yeah, well, the profit is the experience itself, and so we did that to see if we could we travel to Japan and cook with new weird ingredients, or at least to us weird, that we'd never seen before. Could we do something fresh? Could we, challenge ourselves? And it really worked. So it was a huge kind of training camp to come back to Noma 2.0, where we decided to have 3-season menu, where in the summer, when everything is green and the plant kingdom is sort of king, queen, and everything, we'd focus only on vegetables and be a vegetarian restaurant. And then when the leaves fall from the trees, we'd focus on the forest, game meats, mushrooms, wild fruits. And when everything started to freeze over, we'd focus on the ocean, because that's when the high season is, pristine seafood. And that really works for us, that seasonality. There's a car alarm right now. Can you hear it?
Yeah, oh, it's fine.
Okay.
I'm fascinated in that the success can be limiting because I wish that was a lesson a lot of leaders in the business world would learn, because success, like you said, can pigeonhole you, and it makes you kind of repeat the same things that you've always done. And I think it kind of, it can close down the innovative, the creative side of your brain and make you just try to do the same thing. And then you forget that the world around you is changing and that everything is changing and you're still doing the same thing. And then all of a sudden you go from, peak of the game and you start dropping and you can't understand why. And it's because you, sometimes you need to take that pause. So I love that you did that.
Hey, I just want to say one major change that we made here in this transition phase that we're in is that just when the pandemic started, I also decided that as much energy and dedication and care as we put into making the next plate of food and sourcing the ingredients and so on and so forth, we need to develop a team that has the same energy and spirit, but from our financial side, which we had never really focused on. And that's a different new approach to us that we have to learn and to see if we can learn to also become an organization that financially also can be here in 20, 30 years from now,
Yeah, no, I like that approach. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Remember, if you subscribe to the show, you will also get access to a bonus episode with René, where he shares what he does to stay creative, advice for leaders who want to inspire their teams, how to avoid your ego from taking over, how to stay curious, and how to transform yourself and your organization. The subscription is only available on Apple Podcasts, and it's $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year for ad-free listening, early access to new episodes, and bonus episodes. It's less than the cost of a cup of coffee a month. And you are going to get enormous value from being a subscriber, and you also get to support the show. I hope you decide to subscribe.